So we are in the middle of the in-season tournament. I would love to get the league perspective from the commissioner on what you have seen so far in terms of the games that have been played.
It's been really exciting. The guys have embraced it. The courts, I think, are spectacular. I'm a big fan of this one in particular. I know there's been some debate out there.
Wait, I don't make sure I get this on the record. You're a fan of this. You like the court.
I like the courts. I like this one in particular. I think it's got a nice balance. It's not too colorful, but it gets your attention. So I like that. But most importantly, the players have been truly engaged. I think they've embraced it. Drew can speak to this, but I think the international players grew up in systems where they had cups. There were other competitions throughout the season. I think a lot of the U.S. players who in college would have the Thanksgiving tournament or the holiday tournament. So, look, I think you can say to NBA players, the most competitive people in the world, there's something to win. There's a cup. There's a neutral site game in Las Vegas. There's money on the line. I think it's been really exciting so far.
Now, just from the process of this in-season tournament, I mean, the years of planning, I mean, how much went into this and what made this season the season to do it?
Well, you were still playing when we first started talking about it.
I was actually, my first year out, you got to remember, I worked in the NBA league offices, so he was my boss for 1 year.
Yeah, just for 1 year. But so Drew knows we've been talking about this for a while, and a lot went into it. I mean, it required the cooperation of the Players Association, ultimately the players buy in to say that they sort of thought this was a good idea. There were many different permutations. In fact, initially the in-season tournament was called the mid-season tournament, and it was going to stand apart from regular season games. And then as we worked through it, we decided 82-game season is a long season. It didn't make sense to add games on top of that. And then again, we took from this international soccer concept that games could count for more than your regular season. They can also be on a parallel track and count for this competition as well. And then it came together. There's a guy named Evan Wash in the league office who was sort of the ultimate designer of this specific plan. But again, a lot of feedback directly from players, from our teams, and I have no doubt after we get through this first season of the in-season tournament, there'll be some tweaking before we go into next season.
Commissioner Silver, I'd love to get your take on just the international flavor of the NBA and where we are now in terms of the globalization. You see international players out here on the floor right now.
Yeah, well, we're now up to over a quarter of the players in this league were born outside the United States, and they're not just guys who are in the league, but you're talking about now most recently the first pick, Victor Wembanyama is French. You have the last 5 MVPs in this league that, have all been international players. So you're seeing real elite basketball playing around the world. You're seeing great training from around the world, great academy systems that are developing these players. And, American players are stepping up their games in response. But it just demonstrates this is truly a global game and wherever you grow up, Drew knows this, whether you're in Johannesburg or whether you're in, you name it, you're in Slovenia, your dream is to play in the NBA.
Yeah, and speaking of international players, I know you spent a ton of time last year watching Victor Wembanyama and his teammate, Bilal Coulibaly, who we have as our rookie this year in the 7th pick. Have you got to see Bilal play this year versus last year when he was a teammate with Victor Wembanyama?
This is my first time seeing him in person this year. I saw him out of Summer League. Been obviously watching him on television. He's a great story because but for Victor, probably wouldn't have had scouts looking at his team in Paris. I mean, it just goes to show how much talent there is out there in the world. But both, I think for him and Victor, the French system does a great job developing these players. It's in essence state-sponsored where you have elite kids playing together, playing in national competitions. I think that's where you're not, some markets where you're not seeing elite players develop, where there's a lot of basketball being played, it's because these kids aren't getting out and playing real competition at a young age. And I think a lot of the European countries have a great balance because it's not, frankly, like a lot what happens in our system where you got kids playing 7 and 8 games in a weekend. Instead, it's a better balance on their bodies, and they're teaching them more skilled basketball.
Okay. Sure, I'd love to ask you about the competitiveness of this league. The last 5 NBA champions have been different. This has been a league that was born out of dynasty. When you think about the Celtics and the Lakers, how pleased is the league to have this kind of balance across the league?
We're hugely pleased. What we've always said is that we want parity, but we want parity based on management, based on opportunity. We don't want forced parity where you're just artificially breaking up teams. And I think what we have now is the world's changed, particularly digital and social media. I'll just go back to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo. Like, if you're in Milwaukee, you're going to be globally famous. Nobody's going to convince him that if only you were in Chicago, you would be a bigger star. And I thought it was interesting when Victor Wembanyama, I think, frankly, Drew, 10 years ago, if he were drafted by San Antonio, some people would be like, oh, no, now people aren't going to see him play. Now, nobody thinks twice about that. He's drafted by San Antonio, and the reaction is, great, you know, R.C. Buford, you know, Coach Pop, they know how to develop international players. They know how to develop big men. What an opportunity. So I think, and also just like the country's changing, people want to live all over the country, so I don't think it's automatic that some guys like small markets, some guys like bigger markets. So I think that has a lot to do with parity. Also, great negotiations with the Players Association over time to sort of make the system better, do a better job distributing players.
Commissioner, I wanted to ask you about the play-in tournament. We've had 3 years of it right now. What are your thoughts on it as we're moving into another season of it? And do you see potentially maybe some tweaks to it?
In some ways, it's working better than we anticipated. We knew when we had the in-season tournament, we'd create some must-see television towards the end of the season, some of those single elimination games. What we didn't anticipate was, because of course you're in the play-in if you're 7 or 8, you know, then 9 or 10, and so therefore teams would go all out not to have to compete in the play-in, so want to make sure they got the 6th seed, so that would make them more competitive in the last month of the season. And then what you're seeing is, and this is what we'd really hope, some teams that frankly may have otherwise thrown in the towel sort of in March or April because they're saying, you know, our star player's been out or was out early in the season, it's no point bringing them back at this point, it's too many games to cover. Instead now, those teams are going all out and thinking, if we can get in the play-in, then, you know, we got as good a shot as anybody else does. So, to the point where this last season, with 2 weeks left in the season, we still had 26 teams that were competing to get into the playoffs. So that all has been positive. I'm not sure yet in terms of additional changes. I know we will look at it. I mean, we're always focused on incentives, and I think just to make sure that even towards the end of the season, that to the extent that teams really see that there's a viable path to competing, but still rewarding the teams with the best regular season records. That's the balance we're always trying to achieve.